You're listening to Language Nerds Do Earth, the podcast about linguistics, culture, travel, and how they're all connected. Now, it's time for your language nerd hosts. One in China, one in Spain. It's Patrice and Rachel.
Hi everyone, I'm Patrice.
And I'm Rachel.
And welcome back to Language Nerds Do Earth. This is our 9th episode.
Yeah. So this week we're going to talk a little bit about cross-cultural dating.
Yes, so we'll talk a little bit about the phenomenon and how it's increasing all over the world. Some problems that people might experience in cross-cultural dating, and some tips.
Yeah.
And then we have a hilarious Lost in Translation moment from Brian in South Korea.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
And another exciting thing, we have a new review from Charlie's grandmom, who says, "Love this podcast. I'm not a world traveler, nor am I bilingual, but I love this podcast. I learn something new every week from Rachel and Patrice. They bring up things that I've never considered, and I find myself waiting anxiously for the next episode. Keep them coming, ladies." Yay.
That's really nice.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's really sweet. I'm so glad to hear that you're getting something out of it, even though you're not necessarily a world traveler.
Yeah, that's great. It makes me feel good that we can have a little bit of something for everyone.
Yeah, me too. And also, John said on the last episode, "Great information presented in a highly entertaining light. Love the stories. Keep up the wonderful work." Thank you, John.
Thank you. So, first we have some language news, which I guess this week is not so much language news as maybe like audio news. Anyway, you've definitely heard of it if you've been on the internet in the last week.
Yeah, it's pretty contentious.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to just establish right now, we are a non-partisan podcast. Although...
And I don't even know actually what you've heard yet, so...
Yeah, same. So we're going to have a big reveal.
Mm-hmm.
But first, let's talk about why people heard what they heard.
Right. Well, I guess first we should say what we're talking about even. So we're talking about the Laurel Yanny phenomenon that somebody did an audio recording of on their computer, and it kind of sounded like two different words, and so then it sparked this whole debate and like this whole conundrum.
Yeah, it's the same piece of audio, and some people hear Laurel and some people hear Yanny. So here it is.
Laurel, 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 Laurel.
When I first heard about this, I thought, wow, this is a really interesting auditory phenomenon, and I thought, well, I wonder like what a linguistic perspective of this would be. So I asked Mr. Google what he thought about a linguistic perspective on the Yanny-Laurel debate. So it really depends on your linguistic background. People tend to match the sounds they hear onto words that they've heard before.
Yeah. And
also the shape of your ears even make a difference.
Yeah. And it also depends like what kind of speakers you're listening to. Are you listening to kind of crappy speakers, or is the bass louder, or are you listening to your earbuds, and you could have some hearing loss or something like that, and that might affect if you hear higher pitches or lower pitches.
Ah, that's really interesting. It makes me wonder if I have hearing loss or not.
Ooh, are you telling me something?
No, I'm not telling you anything.
So, what do you hear?
So when I first heard it, I heard Laurel.
Okay.
What did you hear?
I heard Yanny.
Ah, I see.
The first time I heard it, I heard Yanny. And that was like listening to through my earbuds, like on the bus, noisy place. And then, like, I listened to it 2 times this afternoon. And the first time I heard Yanny. And then I listened to it again a few minutes later, and my washing machine was going. And it was like a really high-pitched noise. And I heard Laurel only.
Wow.
Yeah, it kind of like canceled out the high noise or whatever.
Basically, if you're hearing the higher pitches of the sound, then you hear Yanny. If you're hearing more the lower pitches of the sound, then it's more Laurel.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, when I first heard it, I was sitting right next to Seth, and he played it from his computer, and he had the computer on his lap, and he heard Yanny, and I heard Laurel.
Okay.
And then we were watching, like, Jimmy Fallon, and he played it over a speaker in his audience, and I heard Yanny. So that's really interesting that you heard a different sound when your washing machine was playing, too.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't hear the high noise anymore because the washing machine sound was really high-pitched.
Yeah.
And I couldn't hear that one anymore.
That's crazy. It's kind of like those drawings that it's like a profile, and it's like, do you see an old lady or do you see a horse?
Yeah.
And you, like, can't unsee one of them, but you can't see both at the same time.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same thing.
Or the duck and the rabbit.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Okay, well, glad we got that out of the way.
Yeah.
It's a lot less tense in here. So today we are going to dive into a very salacious topic about dating cross-culturally.
Mm-hmm.
This episode is actually in time for the royal wedding, which is also a cross-cultural relationship. So if you don't know, Meghan Markle is an actress from LA, and she just married the Prince of England.
Yeah, I think he's the Prince of Wales.
That sounds better. Prince of England sounds weird.
Although I think William is the heir, maybe. Yeah, and I think she's the first American to enter into the royal family, right?
That makes sense.
I'm not sure about that, but I think so.
I have a friend from the UK who was telling me earlier that it used to be really common for high society Americans to buy into, not the royal family, but, society in the UK. So,
okay.
Like if you've watched Downton Abbey.
Of course.
There's that one American woman, yes, of course, who was really rich and married a duke or something.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah,
right.
It makes sense that she's the first American to marry into royalty.
I think so, yeah.
Good job, Megan. I'm married to an American now, but I have dated two guys from outside of the U.S., and Rachel is currently in a cross-cultural relationship with a very nice man that we all like.
Yes, I certainly do.
Yeah, that's the important thing. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about how much people have cross-cultural relationships.
Okay. I think if you kind of pay attention and reflect a little bit, you can probably notice that there has been an increase in the past years. But let's quantify that a little bit.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So I couldn't find as good as statistics as I wanted to find, but anyway, I found an Economist article that is talking about the increase of cross-border marriages.
Yeah.
So basically it found that the fastest growing rate of cross-border marriages or international marriages was in some Mediterranean countries, specifically Spain and Italy. So in 1995, they just accounted for less than 5% of the total of marriages. And by 2009, in Italy, it was at 14% and 22% in Spain. So that's quite a big increase in like 15 years. Less than 15
that's
years.
Huge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I found a similar article about the increase in South Korea. So in Korea, over 10% of marriages included a foreigner in 2010, which is up from just 3.5% in 2000. So that's a huge jump, too. It's like triple the proportion.
And it's also the younger generation, so 25 to 39-year-olds. And that's where you're going to find more of these types of relationships.
And that makes sense. I mean, people who have been more exposed to a globalized world and have had the opportunity to meet more people from different cultures and maybe are a little bit more open-minded.
Yeah.
Although it is the marrying age anyway. So.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the time that most people are getting married, at least for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so much easier to travel now, too. So
Right.
more people are doing it, and that leads to, more relationships.
Yeah, traveling and also migration patterns. Migration patterns are always changing. Right now we have a lot of people fleeing from a few countries in Africa, in the Middle East, like from Syria into Germany. Ever since the 90s, we've had a lot of Mexicans coming into the U.S. Actually, that number is net negative right now. There are more Mexicans leaving the U.S. than coming in. But yeah, all of these migration patterns also result in increasing numbers of cross-cultural romances, which is kind of sweet, I think.
Yeah, out of something maybe negative, like a war or something like that, then maybe something positive could come.
Exactly.
And Venezuela, too, is in the middle of a huge crisis at the moment.
Yeah.
So in Spain, there are a huge number of Venezuelans.
Huh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Spain is one of the easier countries in Europe to move to for Latin Americans. There are easier immigration laws than for other countries, since they are former colonies. So it's a little bit easier to get your residency for, like, say, Amelia than for me.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Yeah. Is his mom still in Venezuela?
Mm-hmm.
It's rough.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a huge increase in cross-cultural relationships and marriages, but also that comes with an increase in divorces. With more marriages, you're going to get more divorces. I found this article about how in China there's a higher rate of cross-cultural divorce, partly due to cultural differences, parenting styles, and lack of communication.
Okay, do you want to go ahead and talk about some of the potential problem areas that can happen in cross-cultural?
Yeah, definitely. So one problem that you might find in a cross-cultural relationship or marriage is difficulty visiting your loved one.
Yeah.
So that's something that, besides like long-distance relationship part or not long distance and all the communication issues, but just the logistical issues of trying to make sure that you stay in the same country as them long term.
Totally.
It can be kind of a pain in the butt.
Yeah, my mom is having that issue with her husband
in Peru,
trying to work on immigration papers, and he wasn't able to get a visa to come for a visit, not for moving, but just to visit. Right. So that's been very complicated, and so she's been traveling to Peru a lot. And
yeah. Oh, your poor mom has to go to Peru all the time.
Yeah, but, they saw each other in January, and then they saw each other again at the end of April.
Yeah, that's rough. That's a long time. I remember when I had a boyfriend in Germany, 3 months was kind of the maximum that I would want to go without being in each other's physical presence. Although I know people who've gone a lot longer than that in a long-distance relationship.
Yeah.
Number 2, we have need of assistance and help from the local partner. So feeling kind of dependent on somebody who understands the local culture more.
Yeah.
I guess you and Emilio don't really have that because you're both in a foreign place.
Actually, yeah, I was going to bring that up because there's a big difference, I think, between one person living in their home country and the other one being a foreigner, and both people being a foreigner.
Yeah.
Because it's not like one person is on the other's home turf and the other person's super comfortable and everything's always as a husband.
Right.
Yeah, it's a bit more like you both have to adjust to a third culture.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's kind of like, I ended up marrying an American, but we're in another culture together. And I don't know about you, but I think one reason I like it so much, for us, it kind of results in a lot of team building.
Yeah.
I think it makes you closer as a couple when you go through all these experiences together, like trying to figure out, like, why is something done this way? Yeah,
for sure. And it's been interesting, I think, for us as just a point of conversation, we'll talk about something that seems strange or seems unusual to us from like our own cultural background about Spanish culture, and then it'd be like, oh, like what's it like in Venezuela, or what's it like in the United States?
Yeah.
I mean, he has spent time in the United States, so he knows some things, but it's not his home culture. So still, it's like, it's an interesting like exchange of knowledge and things that you wouldn't necessarily think about. Like, let's see if I can think of an example.
No, but I know what you're saying. Like when you are always discovering things about each other's culture. Actually, that was one piece of advice when I was reading through advice from binational couples. And they said at some point you're not really sure what part of somebody is them or their culture.
Right.
You know, part of dating somebody and being in a relationship with somebody is getting to know them as a person and their background, and then adding culture on top of it makes it also really interesting. It's like an onion. Yeah,
it's really interesting, I think, you know, if you're from the same culture, or if you're like, let's say, a German living in Germany, married to or in a relationship with, I don't know, an Italian, let's say. It's a little bit different because we're both kind of questioning the culture that we're in together, and then kind of comparing, whereas I think you don't necessarily think about it that much if you're in your home culture. And the person who, like, let's say the Italian person, they might notice things, but maybe they don't voice their observations, and there's not like a reciprocal interest in their culture.
Right.
Since it's kind of irrelevant, maybe.
Yeah. So being in a relationship with somebody who's from a different culture, but in a third culture together, might make things easier.
I'm thinking.
I guess it depends on who you are.
And yeah, I would say that one point, if you are in a relationship where you're living in your home country and you're dating someone who's from another culture, would be to show a lot of interest in their culture.
Yeah.
Especially because probably you're living close to your family or friends, or at least relatively close, and that's one way to like help your partner not feel as homesick, if you can kind of explore their culture from afar.
That's a really nice idea.
Thanks.
Yeah. You know, when you're with somebody from a different culture, if you pay attention, you'll be seeing the world from their eyes, right? So it's good to have empathy in a relationship. And part of that empathy is asking, you know, what do you see? How do you feel about this?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that is an important point. Obviously, communication in all relationships is very important.
Right. Romantic, non-romantic, doesn't really matter.
Right. Another point is a different perception of marriages between both partners. So in some cultures, marriage can be looked at as something that's more loose. And in others, it's a lot more strict. Like, I remember talking to somebody from Europe who was talking about infidelity. And I think in Europe, as opposed to the US, infidelity is viewed as something that needs to be talked about, obviously, and worked through, but not as much as a deal breaker as it is in the US. Have you heard that?
I can't say that I have, but maybe that could be.
Or another thing that is a different perception is like marriage roles, right? So in Asia, they're so much more traditional.
Many African cultures as well.
Right. Middle Eastern.
Right. The woman should take on a much more traditional household role a lot of times.
Right.
And if the man thinks that about his wife who comes from a different culture, there might be some real conflicts there.
Right.
So I guess it's just something that you would have to just talk through before and maybe, I don't know, come to a compromise.
Right. I think communication is really important in all relationships, but especially in cross-cultural relationships, just because there are a lot of unspoken things that happen in a relationship. And if you're the kind of person who doesn't usually talk stuff out, that's going to make things a lot harder for you in a cross-cultural relationship than it might say in like a relationship where you're with somebody from your culture.
Yeah, and while we're speaking about communication, let's talk about language differences.
Yeah, that's what our podcast is about.
Yeah.
Yeah, language differences are fun.
They can also be very challenging if you're in a relationship with someone.
Yeah.
And maybe you speak the same language, but not super well.
Right. There are a lot of linguistic nuances that you might be missing out on if you're speaking a second language. I have some friends in China who are from Latin America and Europe, and their common language is English, so they're both speaking a second language when they're communicating with each other. But we learned last week that non-native speakers of English are actually better communicators than native speakers of English, so maybe that's an okay thing for them.
Right. It is a compromise, though, that you're making when you decide that you're going to speak your second language with your partner.
Yeah, that's true.
Because sometimes it's really nice to speak your own language. Also, my friend Anne speaks French, and her boyfriend speaks Italian, but their common language that they usually speak in is English.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's changed. I don't think so. She's learning Italian, but yeah, that's the language that they started their relationship in, which is another big thing. Once you start your relationship in a certain language, it's super hard to change.
Right. Yeah, we talked about that in episode 7 about bilingual cities, how when you start a relationship with somebody, whether it be a friendship or a romantic relationship or a professional relationship, it's really weird to go from one language to the next. So thinking about Anne learning Italian, like that's great, and I'm sure that her boyfriend will be happy to help her with it, but they'll probably always stick to English.
Yeah, but it's always good if you can learn your partner's language.
Yeah.
For many reasons.
Right, yeah. It definitely gives you insight into their culture and their background.
Right.
That you wouldn't get otherwise.
And it also, I think, shows a level of, I don't know, interest in them and interest in learning more about them, as you said. Also, it lets you communicate with their family, their friends, which could be a big problem if you don't speak their language and then you go to visit his or her parents and you don't speak the language. And
yeah, right. Getting to know the family of your partner is going to be a lot harder if you don't speak their language and they don't speak yours, and you want to make a good impression, but all you've got is body language.
Yeah, exactly.
So my background is I started dating one German guy when I was 16, and then we broke up when I was 19, at which point I immediately started dating another German guy and stayed with him until I was 21. So that gave me a good 5 solid years to learn German really well.
Okay.
But with the first guy, I went to visit him in Germany for the first time, and my German was just, I spoke like 4 words, and all I could do was just smile a lot, which we learned in episode 6 is actually a really terrible thing to do in Germany, because it just makes you look really stupid. They were probably like, simple little American girl, but they were really nice, and eventually I was able to develop a relationship with them because I got better and better at German, partly thanks to them.
That's cool.
Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, another potential conflict is religious differences between partners.
This could potentially be a big one.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think people tend to gravitate to others who have the same religion as themselves.
Yeah, often.
But if you're in a relationship with somebody who is a lot more religious than you or a lot less religious than you, that can definitely cause some tension.
Yeah. And, you have to learn about the other person's religion, and if you have children, you have to decide how to raise them. And I think that doesn't just go for cross-cultural relationships. Even, let's say, 2 people in the United States,
right.
Christian, Jewish, they still have to decide how to raise their kids. And in their day-to-day life, what do they practice?
Right. And what do they expect out of their partner as well? What do they want them to do?
Yeah.
Life expectations. Some people might want something different out of life than what you want. I think one of the hardest things about being in a cross-cultural relationship is you really do have to set very clear communication rules at the very beginning. I mean, I guess once it starts getting serious, you would need to start having those conversations maybe a little bit earlier than you would in your own culture.
Yeah, that's true. Like where you want to live. And related to location also could be family and the importance of family.
Right.
You know, for some people, they might want to live close to their family, and it's one of their core values.
Yeah.
And if both people want that, then that's gonna be a point that they'll have to work out. Oh, one thing that could be potentially problematic but also potentially really fun is how do you celebrate your traditions?
Right.
Imagine, like, for example, me and Emilio. So we come from Christian-y countries. Not that the United States has a technical religion, but that's what it would probably be. So anyway, Christmas is a thing that we both celebrate.
Yeah.
So when you're in a relationship where you have shared traditions, so it could be Christmas, it could be, I don't know, New Year's or whatever. How do you combine your traditions? You kind of get to pick like your favorite parts of them and experiment and experience different ways of doing things.
Yeah, that is fun. I think just being in a relationship where you have to make those kinds of compromises all the time, if you're not a relaxed person, then you become one, or you have to become one.
Yeah,
so
totally.
Compromising on things like traditions or family perceptions or where you want to live or how you want to live. There's a lot of compromise in all relationships, but especially in cross-cultural ones.
Yeah. I know you and Seth are like from the same culture, but I think everyone has like different, you know, Christmas traditions.
Yeah.
So how did you like decide what to do?
Well, I mean, that's kind of the beauty of living abroad together, right? I think we really started celebrating Christmas together when we were both in South Korea. And at that point, I don't know, we just kind of like made decisions together, and we didn't have any real pressure from society on like Christmas lights or anything. Yeah, like, I mean, I think being abroad together kind of gives you that freedom of being able to make it what you want it to be, because you don't have your culture around you doing certain things, and then you have the foreign culture that does its own thing that you might not really get. And so then you kind of just get to do whatever you want.
Yeah. And get whatever food you want, and
yeah,
food is like super important.
Yeah, I'm really surprised we haven't done an episode on food at this point, actually.
Okay, yeah, that's gonna happen soon.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Okay, episode 11, food.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's get into a little bit of advice for cross-cultural relationships. So we've talked a lot about advice, but just some takeaways then. Obviously, be patient with somebody who's not from your culture. Stereotypically, Germans want things done a certain way. I mean, you see it in their language. There are a million different rules for German language, and they are followed very well. There isn't a lot of straying from grammar rules in German. And I think that was something where I clashed a little bit with the guys that I dated in Germany, because they were always used to things being done a certain way. But when you're, like we said, when you're dating somebody who's not from your culture, there's going to be a lot of compromise.
Yeah, that's a good one. I also think a lot of it can just be kind of worked through by really clear communication.
Yeah, huge takeaway here.
Yeah. That goes for, religious differences or language differences or pretty much everything.
Yeah. Clear communication is even harder when you don't speak each other's native tongue.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, and be willing to make sacrifices, be willing to compromise. That's really key, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, well, I think that pretty much covers everything when it comes to cross-cultural dating. Do you know what time it is, Rachel?
What time is it?
It's time for our Lost in Translation moment.
Oh, how exciting.
Yes. This week, our moment comes from Brian in South Korea. And a little plug, Brian actually also has his own podcast. It's called Grand Slam KBO. It's about Korean baseball. So if you're interested in learning about what's going on in the Korean baseball scene, Grand Slam KBO does player interviews and everything's in English. So if you're interested in sports on an international level, go check out their podcast.
Yeah, they do a really good job analyzing baseball. Something that I don't really know about, but they do a good job with that.
Yeah. Okay. So, Brian, let's hear your Lost in Translation moment.
Hello everyone, my name's Brian Richards, and I've been living in the Republic of Korea for about 7 years now. But when I first came, I didn't speak Korean very well, and I had gone into a Korean restaurant one time and managed to order some dumplings. But I had decided the next time I went in that I wanted to try a fried pork dish. However, I didn't know the Korean word to order that. So I attempted to just say pork. The woman stared at me quizzically and finally just smiled, nodded, said okay, and walked off. However, to my surprise and sadness, she came back with a plate of dumplings. So that happened, and I was sad. A second time, many years later, despite being in Korea at that point for maybe 5 years, my language skills had not improved that much, and I managed to break my hand playing baseball. While at the hospital, in the ER, in the small town I was living in, they apparently didn't speak English, so through my pidgin Korean, a few English words, we managed to get across that my hand was broken, and I would, as I thought, need surgery. So what I thought I asked them very clearly was, will I be having surgery today? In which they said yes. And then surgery never happened. So I asked them, when will I have surgery? And they said, next week. And then it turns out I missed my appointment, and completely that I was supposed to just meet the doctor for an assessment. And to top it all off, I never had surgery. So those are two of my stories of miscommunication due to language barrier. Thank you very much.
That's a really big deal if you think you're going to have surgery and then it turns out you don't get surgery.
Yeah, I would be a little bit freaking out.
Yeah.
Thinking I'm going to have surgery and then it just never happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Brian, for your Lost in Translation moments.
Yes, thank you so much.
I wonder, if the woman in the Korean restaurant was just kind of like, well, I don't understand what he's saying, but I do know he got dumplings last time, so let's just do that.
Oh, I feel that pain, though. Trying to order something in Korea and not getting it correct.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Or, ordering something that you think might look good, and then turns out that it is not good at all. The other day I was at a restaurant with some friends here in China, and we were looking at the menu, and we were like, okay, how about this? And the server comes to us with this plate of, bony fat. There was, very little meat on it. It was just kind of great, sorry. And I'm the one who suggested it. I was like, this looks good, but all I've got are pictures, so... Thanks, Brian. That was great. Classic surgery miscommunication.
Yeah, that's so difficult dealing with health issues in another language.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Anyway, I think that pretty much wraps up the episode for the week.
Yes, indeed-o.
So we'd love to hear your experiences in cross-cultural relationships. I know we have lots of friends who are in it, and I think we'll have to do another episode on this topic in a little while, and we'll bring on some guests for that, I think.
Yeah.
But if you have any experiences dating somebody who doesn't come from your culture, we'd love to hear from you and tell your story. You can tell us what's difficult, what's not difficult, if you agree or disagree with us.
We would love to hear.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, follow us on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, Pinterest. And we also like to write about our experiences living and traveling abroad, so you can subscribe to our blog from our website.
Yeah. If you can't get enough of us from our podcast, we'll be on social media to fill in the gap. Last week we put up some pictures of traveling with our moms, since we interviewed our moms about travel experiences. So that's up on Instagram. If you could leave us a review on iTunes, that would be amazing. We love getting those validations. But also, more importantly, people are going to be more prone to find us when we have more reviews on iTunes. So keep them coming, guys.
Yes.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. And don't forget to tell your friends about it if you enjoy the show.
Yeah. And next week we're going to be talking about Ramadan.
Yeah. I'm really excited. Yeah, so happy Ramadan, Muslim friends.
Yes. All right.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for listening, and have a great week, everybody.
Yep. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.